Here's one of the things that has worked for me for many, many years, and I teach this in several of the courses that I teach, and that is to ask yourself these questions. What do I believe? Where is home? Where am I going? And who am I? Now, those 4 questions are often at least partly unanswerable, and or the answers shift over time.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Sivana podcast. I'm so honored you're listening and glad to have you here, especially because today we're discussing one of my very favorite questions, which is how we can get more deeply connected to our own intuition, find connectedness to spirit in this busy, crazy world, and develop true mind-body-spirit balance. Here to speak with me on this topic is Deb Bowen. She's a spiritual educator, author, and psychic. She's also the co-host of her own podcast, Psychic Teachers, which has been on the air for more than 7 years and been downloaded 3.2 million times. We're going to be talking today about how to develop that intuitive superpower within ourselves through meditation, through journaling, through chakra balancing, cards, and how we can really use these things in order to take actions that fuel our life purpose. Before we dive in and get started, I just wanted to remind you that we'd love to see you in our private Facebook group, SivanaEast.com/group. And of course, I'd love to hear from you on how I'm doing. I would love your feedback in the form of an iTunes review, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show. So super excited for today. Deb, thanks so much for being here and being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. I feel like this is going to be the juiciest chat. So there's so many places that we can start, but I know one of the first things I wanted to ask you was this idea of, if we're talking about intuition or connectedness to spirit, I don't know if those are two different things, and there's so much you're going to share with us. But one thing I wanted to ask is just like a first question is, how do people recognize what our intuition is, sort of like first and foremost? Because I know for me, like sometimes it feels like a gut feeling, and sometimes it feels like an epiphany I have in the shower, and sometimes we really think of it as that third eye, 6th chakra center. And I know this is an area like everyone wants to be more intuitive and get connected more to this concept and area, but I think a lot of people struggle with even like, what does it feel like? Where is it in my body?
The answer to that question is yes. And here's what I mean by that. Here's what has been my experience and what my guides have taught me. And that is that all of us are intuitive. Everybody listening to this podcast is intuitive. What makes some folks different than others is that they attend to it more. They pay more attention to their intuition. We've all had those moments in our lives where we've said, gosh, I knew that, whatever that might have been, or I had a feeling, or wow, I wish I'd done so-and-so because I was hearing this little voice in my head that said, do this or do not do this. Those are all pieces of the puzzle of intuition. When I teach and talk about building one's intuition, I talk about what we call the Clairs. And a lot of folks think that what that means is, oh, I must be clairvoyant and I must see things. Well, even people who are clairvoyant don't always see things. Sometimes they get symbols, for example. So primarily we have clairvoyance, which is clear seeing, clairaudience, which is clear hearing, clairgustience, which is not one you hear about very often. It's smelling something when we are tasting some kind of information, and we do that sometimes. We'll be in a room, for example, and you'll get a whiff of pumpkin pie, and suddenly you're transported back to your grandma's kitchen. Well, probably that's because grandma sent you a message. We also have claircognizance, which is clear knowing, and clairsentience, which is that gut feeling that you're talking about. That's clairsensing. So we have all of those, and all of us have all of them. It's just that some of us have one or the other more prevalent and more pronounced and more active practiced than others. I, for example, am primarily clairaudient. My guide, folks are going to laugh at this, but it's true. My guides send me messages in old rock and roll lyrics, and I'm really very serious about that. I will start hearing lines from an old song and realize, oh, I'm getting information in some way about some intuitive event that I need to focus on. But I also get clairsentient information. I feel it in my gut, and we all do. That's our primary seat of intuition, is that third chakra, what we call our solar plexus chakra, just below our belly buttons. We also often get information through, as you say, our third eye, or what's called our brow chakra. And that's where we hear. We get information, interestingly, through the third eye, auditorily. We'll hear a voice that gives us a scene that we can see, for example. So we all have that. And one of the ways that we can begin to build on those clairs is by playing with them. It really is a happy, joyful, playful universe. And the more we approach this world of metaphysics and learning about our intuitive selves in a joyful, playful manner, the more quickly we learn and the more the universe responds. So here's a simple game you can play. If you're somebody who works in a building with a bank of elevators, stand in front of the elevators, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and see if the information will come to you in whatever of those ways I've just talked about as to which elevator door is going to open up first. And the more you practice that, the more you will find yourself just automatically standing in front of the door that's going to open first.
I feel like I'm having this really cool aha moment here already, because I never thought of this idea of whether we want to call it intuition or connectedness, and I want to talk more about that in a moment, but being sort of divided through the senses, like you're saying. And just like some people are incredible, they have like an amazing sense of smell, or, they can hear something really far off, or I know I can see, like my vision is amazing. I can read signs that are so far away. My husband's like, how can you even see that? So we can think of that on like a practical level, but then you're saying on this deeper level that all of our senses are always a doorway to receive information. Am I understanding right?
You are. You're understanding me exactly right. And it's important to be able to practice using the various clairs and see which one works for you. I teach courses in how to do that and how to work with your chakra system to learn how to better access that kind of information. But we also need to learn to shut it down in terms of learning intuitive ability to balance, align, then and open your chakra system. But you don't want to walk around in the world with your chakra system wide open all the time, because you would just get on sensory overload if you did that. So there are times that you need to shut them down some. My favorite example of this is you really do not want to go into a Walmart with your chakra system open. You just don't.
Right. Or airport security maybe would be another place.
Great example. Absolutely. You don't want to do that. So it's important to be able to have some control over it. And there are also some ethical issues involved. For example, if you get what we call an intuitive hit, about something that might be coming up for a friend of yours, there's some ethical considerations as to whether or not you say what you're getting to that person. Or if you're standing in the grocery line, for example, and the person behind you just turn around and realize, oh, yikes, I can just sense that this is going on with this person. It might not be the appropriate place or time or even needed for you to say anything. So there's a whole ethical component to working on building your intuitive abilities as well. But yes, they're very helpful. It's very helpful to work on building them and connecting with them from a very practical point of view.
And for listeners who are wondering, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm sure people at home are wondering, they're thinking, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I feel, pretty connected to my senses. I know on a practical level, my sense of smell isn't that great, but my vision is good. Is there some tools or tips you give people to help them try to figure out which is sort of their strongest Clair, as you said? Or is it sort of like playing more of those games, like the elevator game? Or are there more examples of those games you can give us?
Oh, sure. I mean, absolutely. Like I said, I teach a whole course in those games. So certainly I can share those with folks who want to learn about that. I'll give you a couple of others as we go along here in a minute. But it's not just our physical senses. Those are what you're describing are indeed the gateway into the intuitive ability. But for example, your ability to be very farsighted and can see things far away. On a physical level, that's great. It's also probably an indication that you may be clairvoyant and that your way of gathering intuitive information is also visually. But it isn't necessarily that you see something if you're clairvoyant with your physical eye. You may see it with your eyes, see whatever it is, with your eyes closed in a metaphoric way. Here's an example. Very few people who are true clairvoyants, even true clairvoyants, rarely see spirits, for example, with their physical eye. That's very, very rare. That's happened to me just a few times in my life. And people who are clairvoyant, really clairvoyant, will say the same thing. But instead, you may close your eyes and you may get a symbol. On the rare occasion, for example, when I'm working with a client and I realize that their grandmother is trying to come through and wants to give some kind of a message, I see in my mind's eye an old woman in an old dress with an apron and old heavy shoes from maybe the 1940s, and she's holding a rolling pin in her hand. I know a lot of people today don't even know what a rolling pin is, but that's my symbol for a grandma. So I may not be able to really see your grandmother at all, but I can see a symbol for that. The key to what you just asked me is meditation. Meditation, meditation, meditation.
Okay, I love it because I love to meditate. So tell us more, because I think people, myself included, they think they need to go on an expensive meditation retreat or study there's so many different styles of meditation and yoga. So is this something that we can keep basic? What's the style of meditation or technique that you like to encourage people to explore?
I teach a course on how to meditate in 1 minute. You really can begin to learn to meditate in 1 minute, and you can meditate successfully in very small, tiny little increments of time, and you don't need to sit still to do it. For example, the little stickers that you get from children, I have one on the rearview mirror of my car. Just a little red sticker, and it's just in the corner of my rearview mirror. So every time I stop at a traffic light and look in my rearview mirror, I see that little red sticker. And that little red sticker says to me, take a deep breath. You're sitting in a traffic light. Just breathe. Just breathe. And if we can learn to just breathe, then we can begin to learn to be still and to calm our minds. Now, when I say be still, I mean internal stillness. As you well know, of course, you can certainly meditate doing yoga. You can meditate walking. You can meditate drumming. You can meditate in moving in any way. I love to walk and meditate at the same time. And when I first started that process, I have such monkey mind. And so one of the things that I would do is I would pick something that was my focus of the walk. So, for example, I would walk along and pay attention to the front doors on all the houses in my neighborhood. I would just focus on the doors. And as I began to do that, the focus then became on my breath and on what was going on internally and the motion of my feet, that connectedness of my feet to the earth. So walking meditation was a great thing for me to begin to do. I live on a barrier island, and so walking on the beach is my meditation most often. I mean, certainly sometimes I will sit in the sand and just be, but walking is my favorite way to meditate. A lot of folks don't meditate well silently, so they do better with some background music or guided imagery. The internet is filled with guided imagery meditations that are helpful for people, that will help them to just be still. Sometimes folks, I think, believe, as you say, that you got to go on a retreat and you got to empty your mind and you got to do all this kind of stuff. That isn't necessarily true. Sometimes in meditation, for me, I can't speak for other people, but for me, my most intuitive thoughts come when I just allow the thoughts to come, when I am still and connected to spirit. So meditation for me is the key to being connected to that intuition.
This podcast was brought to you by SivanaSpirit.com. In ancient Indian mythology, and even today, chakras are considered to be the most important energy centers in the body. It's been said that when all 7 energy points are aligned, deep spiritual development occurs. When the chakras come into balance, they bring harmony, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. In fact, sometimes when we feel off, it's really just these energy points that need to be worked on. Celebrate the 7 chakras with a beautiful must-have chakra tank. Printed down the spine with sophisticated metallic ink, the chakras are represented by unique hand-drawn symbols. You can add a pop to your style with elegance, all while reminding yourself of the deeper spiritual truth of our world. Use the exclusive discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. Do you want a $25 gift card from SivanaSpirit.com completely for free? It's super easy. All you have to do is fill out a quick survey with 7 short questions, and then you'll be emailed your gift card to use whenever you're ready. This survey will help us better understand the most important thing in the world, you. Go to SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey today and claim your reward. Again, that's SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey. So we come to meditation to find this, what we're calling this internal stillness, because that then allows us to be more receptive to messages that are potentially out there for us to receive.
To information coming into us, because that's really all intuition is. It's information that we're getting from some non-physical source. Intuition gives us a connection to a non-physical source of information. And the reason that that's so helpful in a practical way in our everyday life is little things like the elevator or like driving down, and I bet everybody listening to this show has done this. You're driving down the road and suddenly you get this feeling or this little voice that says, yikes, there is probably going to be a traffic problem at the next light. I'm going to turn right here and zig and zag around that and miss it. And later in the day, you learn that indeed there was a stalled car in the intersection and you would have been 10 minutes late to work if you'd have gone the way you normally do. We've all had those kinds of experiences. So those are real practical ways of working with our intuitive abilities. On a deeper level, that intuitive ability allows us to be open and receptive to connection with our spirit guides, to connection to angels, if you work with the angelic realm, to open to messages from nature and the four-legged, winged, swimming, and crawling people around us. I don't use the term animal. So, for example, one of my messengers from spirit is a hawk, and a red-tailed hawk. And so when I am in a quandary, when I have a decision to make, and not just light decisions, but significant decisions in my life, I ask my hawk to come to me, come see me I give them a time frame, come see me within 3 days and let me know that I'm on the right path. And if in 3 days' time I don't see that hawk, I really rethink my decision. But there have been so many times in my life where hawks have flown close enough to me that I could have reached out my arm at eye level and touched a hawk flying in front of my face. Times when I have been driving down the road and hawks have flown along down the roadside next to me. Hawks flying across my windshield. Ospreys, which are a kind of sea hawk, who come and dive over my head sometimes when I'm sitting on the beach.
I'm curious to hear you talk about this more, because I think there's this one part of us, or I know for me personally, one part of me that wants to sit and just wait to receive anything that needs to come to me, right? Either after a meditation or after a really long yoga practice. Then there's another part of you that might really want answers to specific questions or specific life events coming up, or really want guidance. And how do you balance just that receptive energy of just cultivating that stillness and having the senses open with really wanting to know about something in particular, right? Like an upcoming decision or something you want to ask about?
Sometimes, Brett, the answer, as I say, is no. or not now, or not yet. For example, when I teach manifesting courses, and I teach those fairly frequently, I believe that we can manifest about anything we want in our lives. The problem is, or the key is, perhaps not a problem, but the key is knowing what to manifest and when, and to trusting the process that sometimes, as I say, the answer is not now, or that whatever you're wanting is not for your highest good. And we don't know it at the time because we don't have the same information. We don't have privy to the long life view that Spirit has for us. And so we don't always know what's really for our best interest. And I bet everybody who's listening to us has had this experience of wanting something desperately, it not coming to fruition. We're being very disappointed or very angry or whatever emotion we may feel. And then sometime later, when circumstances and the situation may have shifted and changed, we can look back and say, gosh, am I glad that didn't happen, because without whatever that was not happening, the following wonderful things and situations would not have occurred. And so I think we have to just remember that this instant society in which we live is not always the best way to be. I'll give you an example of that. Near where I live, just a few hours away, is a very isolated little island. And I love this island. And I love visiting there. And I go several times a year and do retreats by myself on this lovely little island. And I have this fantasy that I would play the lottery, which I don't do, but I would have this fantasy that I would play the lottery and I would win $1 zillion and I would buy myself a lovely house on the ocean on this little island. That's my fantasy. That's what my conscious mind says, oh, let's manifest. And then my intuition kicks in and it says, are you crazy? Do you really want to do that? Think of the upkeep. Think of the insurance and the taxes. What happens in hurricane season? Do you really want that responsibility at your age and point in life? What are you thinking here? And so then I have to back up and revisit what I really am asking my intuition to help me with, which is that I really just need time and space alone. That's really what I'm asking for underneath that fantasy of this isolated, beautiful house on this island.
I love that example because it's like you're saying your intuition can even help frame the questions or help reframe the questions that you think are that your conscious mind thinks are the correct questions.
Exactly. You're with me. That is exactly right. Yes.
I want because there's so many things I want to ask you about, but I don't want to leave this conversation without touching just a tiny bit on the chakras and how they relate to what we're talking about. You don't have to go super deep, but I was just really intrigued when you were talking about the different the different Clairs, right? And then how that related to the chakra system, because we, listeners of the podcast and myself are pretty familiar with the chakra system. We've had Anodea Judith on the show, and I'm just curious how it fits into the model you're talking about in terms of connectedness to spirit. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Or if someone knows they have a certain chakra that they're working on or that's in excess or in deficiency, would that change their approach to this work?
Sure. Happy to talk about that. The word chakra, as you know and as your listeners know, is a Sanskrit word that means wheel. And so when we think about each chakra and its movement and the sound that each chakra makes, I assume that you've had folks on the show who talked about the various chanting and sounds that we can use. You're talking about vibration. That's what happens. Your chakra system vibrates. Each chakra vibrates at a different frequency, slightly different, but thereabouts. And so when you can really connect with the vibration of the energy of a given chakra, it allows you to open up your intuitive connection to that chakra. So here's an example. Say, for example, that you're somebody who really wants to work on your intuitive ability, your gut feelings, that's how you are beginning to realize that that's your primary intuitive skill. So you're going to want to work with your solar plexus chakra. You're going to want to work with the color yellow. So you might want to use certain yellow stones. I'm sure that when Samantha was your guest, she talked about chakra stones connected to your solar plexus, stones like citrine or sunstone, or even just wearing the color yellow will help connect you to the energy of your solar plexus. You can lay down and meditate with just a square of yellow cloth placed over your solar plexus, just a little square of felt, for example, or a yellow scarf or whatever. Surround yourself with pictures of things that are yellow. Put a picture of a sunflower, for example, up next to your computer. So just to have that connection with the energy of your third chakra is an easy way to begin to connect with your third chakra energy. Now, you also can use meditation with that chakra. You can also use affirmations. For example, you can say, remember that some of the task of the solar plexus chakra is to help us feel powerful, to help us feel confident, to help us trust ourselves and to trust spirit and information that is coming into us. So those are some of the tasks that the solar plexus chakra does. So if you create an affirmation that reminds you that you are loved, that you are confident, that you are able to trust yourself and the information that's coming through you. And you can do that in just a real simple sentence. Always use I am statements, present tense, to create an affirmation for any affirmation you're creating. And you can create a goal book, for example, of what you'd like to learn to feel. And I use that in quotation marks because that's what we're doing, to feel, to intuit through our solar plexus chakra. So you can create a goal book of pictures or phrases or quotes from famous people or whoever that will help you to stay connected to the energy of your solar plexus chakra. Just holding your hand over your chakra and holding your left hand, because remember, the left side of our body is our receptive side.
There's nothing more essential to a gemstone collection than rose quartz, and SivanaSpirit.com has a beautiful selection you'll absolutely love. Use the code PODCAST30 at checkout for 30% off, and we promise you and your heart will be thankful. And am I correct in understanding you that this focus on the third chakra would be for someone who really feels like they want to develop they're the person who's getting those gut feelings, and someone else maybe who feels like they're maybe more connected physically and metaphysically to seeing things might focus more on the sixth chakra?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So it's as the chakras connect to the senses and the clairs that you talked about before, you're just focus in on the chakra, do some chakra healing work based on the sense or clair that you're sort of trying to work with and invite in.
Absolutely. And of course, there are great books out there on the chakra system. If you're really looking at the idea of self-healing with the chakra system, I always recommend Carolyn Meese's book, Anatomy of Spirit, for example, is one of my favorites.
And then another topic that we have in common, besides the chakras, that I love to talk about is journaling and how you can journal to get in touch with your highest self. And that's something I also teach and love. And so I'm super curious how you instruct people to work with that, or what kind of journaling prompts or just sort of self-directed, guided writing you advise people to do if they're working with a journaling practice.
Here's one of the things that has worked for me for many, many years, and I teach this in several of the courses that I teach, and that is to ask yourself these questions. What do I believe? Where is home? Where am I going? And who am I? Now, those four questions are often at least partly unanswerable, and or the answers shift over time. Many, many years ago, because I'm old, so many years ago, I think it was probably in the mid-'70s, somebody asked me, just off the top of their head, they just said to me, well, Deb, what do you believe? What do you believe? So I started to write the answer to what I believed. Well, in 40 years, as I've learned more and grown more, I hope, the answer to that question has certainly grown and changed and evolved over time. So the kind of journaling that I recommend to people is a long-term journaling project. It's not something that you sit down and do in 30 minutes and you're done. It's an ongoing process. So what do I believe? And for me, I update that journal. I go back and reread it a couple of times a year and update it or tweak it or add information from something I've read or something that I've been studying. And I pick a couple of topics every year that I spend a great deal of time and energy learning about. For example, last year I wanted to learn about the Celtic pantheon. So that was my big research project last year, was the Celtic pantheon. And that informed and shifted some of the information in that section of my journal of the what do I believe. Then where is home? And home doesn't mean necessarily a physical place, but I mean home within ourselves. Where is home in terms of of how we feel comfortable and how we feel safe and how we feel secure in our lives, and home within our own skin, home within that sanctity of self-awareness. So where is home? Where are we going? What do we want to learn? I can't imagine being someone who said, well, I don't want to learn anything new. I can't imagine that. So what is it where am I going? And physically, where am I going? You bet there are places to which I want to travel that are on my bucket list, and I'm checking them off one at a time. So where am I going physically? Where am I going spiritually? Where am I going emotionally? And who am I? And the answer to that changes considerably. If I were to ask of your listeners, who are you? I think a lot of folks, and I think we all do this, is we define ourselves in terms of our relationship. Well, I'm a wife, and I'm a mother, and I'm a real estate broker, and I'm a whatever. Our roles and our relationships. And if you stripped all of that away, who are you? Who are you deep in your soul? And those are the kinds of questions that I ask my students in some of my classes to use in their journals. The journals don't have to necessarily be written. I think it's helpful to do that, but that's because I'm a writer, so I like to write. So you can journal using music. You can journal using pictures. You can journal using lines from other people. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to journal and to put together some kind of an ongoing, evolving, growing package of your spiritual journey.
So coming up on the end of our time together, I wanted to make sure to ask you what mind, body, spirit balance looks like for you, because I know that's one of the major things you teach, and I think all of us are probably really heavily weighted in the mind category in today's modern world. So I was just curious, what does that mean to you? What does it look like? And then any practical tips you want to leave us with to get those three things in greater balance?
Mm-hmm. I don't know anybody personally who is balanced in mind, body, spirit. And I don't mean that unkindly. I mean that quite seriously, because exactly what you said, we do get into such a head place with the work that we do and our day-to-day routines and busyness, and our physical activity is sometimes limited to whatever time somebody's spending in a yoga class or walking or running or at the gym. And we don't think about our physical being probably as much as I don't want to say should, but might want to try to do. The same is true for what we put into our bodies and that consciousness of what we're able to eat or not. And then spirituality, is that something that we think of in terms of a particular time of the week? For example, for Christian folks, is that Sunday morning? What does it mean to be connected to spirit? And I think that for me, the three they don't always, because I can talk about it. It doesn't necessarily mean I always do it or do it well. But can we meld them together? For example, and I bet you have had discussions with your listeners about this, mindful eating, just being aware of every bite that goes into your body. So now you've connected, if you just put, a salad on your plate and you slow down, you eat that salad mindfully, then you've got the body piece going on. To think about farmer who raised that tomato, for example. the people who got it to you. I passed a billboard on a highway the other day that said, thank a farmer 3 times a day. And I thought, well, that's not a bad idea. So there's the mindfulness, the eating slowly, the slowing down, the awareness of the food going into our body and the nourishment. And then there's the spiritual piece of knowing that you and that tomato are the same thing, because everything's energy. And so there's a deep spiritual connection to the energy between that tomato and you. So just eating a salad can be mind, body, spirit balance, but it's about bringing that into consciousness.
It's a lot to think about or to invite in. I mean, I know so many of us, it's just life feels so rushed, so I think that's a really great example that you can bring, because I think people maybe think mind, body, spirit balance as like their whole life. And it's like, no, just in the microcosm of your lunch, you can actually bring these things into balance, right?
Absolutely. And one other suggestion for your folks, Brett, is I keep a little, those little tubes of bubble stuff that you get at weddings that people always give away at weddings that you blow bubbles, like children. Mm-hmm. I keep one of those little containers in my car. And when I am sitting at a traffic light and I have looked in my rearview mirror and I have seen my little red dot and I've taken some deep breath, I open my window and I blow bubbles out the car window at traffic light. And here's what that does. It reminds me to be playful, to keep that childlike wonder of the world within me. And it also brings joy to the people around me, whether they're laughing at me saying, what is that crazy old lady in that car? Or whatever, but it just shifts a moment of tension and reality for me, because I'm blowing the bubbles, and for people who see them. It's just a tiny little thing.
I love it. I know. I think so many of us need to integrate little reminders like that into our life to just not take everything so seriously all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Deb, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, and I know your knowledge here is so vast. So I'd love it now if you could just tell listeners how they can get connected with you online, how they can get some of the courses you mentioned, because I'm sure there's many of them who will want to go deeper with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brett. My website is debbowen.com, DEBBOWEN.com. So 2 B's, debbowen.com. You can also find me on Facebook at Psychic Teachers, all one word. That's the website, the Facebook page that I share with Samantha. Our podcast airs every Sunday night at 9:00 Eastern on Blog Talk Radio, and it's Psychic Teachers. You can also listen to it on iTunes. As we said, it's archived on iTunes. I think it's always uploaded sometime Monday morning. So you can listen to more than 7 years worth of our podcast on iTunes. And we too appreciate any comments that folks want to leave on our iTunes page, regardless of however you listen to us, because that helps us a great deal as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll definitely link up your podcast, and it's such a great resource for people who really want to go deep into stones and healing cards and everything. And I feel like we could definitely have both you and Sam back many times over on the show, just because your knowledge is so vast. So I'll make sure to link all those things up in the show notes and below. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch and connecting soon.
Wonderful, Brett. Thank you. And we're looking forward to having you on Psychic Teachers Podcast.
Beautiful Sivana listeners, let me know what you thought of today's show, either in the private Facebook group at savanaeast.com/group. That's going to redirect you to our Facebook group where you can then be approved as a member. I would love to hear your thoughts on today's conversation, or of course in the form of a review. I'm curious to know, are you going to try some of these journaling prompts? Did you know about the different Clairs or senses that Deb talked about? I know that was a big aha moment for me. And when I'm randomly have a song stuck in my head or just some bizarre things happening in my life, I'm going to really think of that as maybe just not random, but an intuitive force coming to talk to me and letting me know different information through all my different senses. That was one of my favorite takeaways from this podcast, and I hope you loved it too. Until next week, I hope you do yoga and meditate and have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day. So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.